So thank you all for attending tonight. We also have several folks here from the City of Bristol, Tennessee staff, City of Bristol, Virginia staff. VDOT is here, I believe in Bristol is here, and I think TDOT will be here shortly. So we have a lot of great staff folks that worked really hard in contributing to this study. So with that said, I'm going to turn this over to WSP, our consultants for the project. Mary Conley and Ann Wallace, they've worked very hard along with city staff, VDOT, TDOT, to make this project happen. As you can imagine, a corridor project anywhere would be kind of difficult, but when you're handed something that's working with two cities, a road across the state line, two DOTs, they had their work cut out for them. So I'm really eager and anxious for everyone to hear what they found, and with that, I'll turn it over to Mary and Ann first.
Thank you, Sheriff. And first of all, thanks everybody for being here tonight. We know that it's a sacrifice of time, and so we want to be respectful. We also want to capture the fact that you were here. So if you didn't, before you leave tonight, please sign the sign-in sheet just so that we can have a record of your attendance. That would be really helpful. All right, so what you'll see on the screen behind me, and we're going to do a little bit of magic tonight, we're using Mentimeter. So if you have a smartphone and would like to take it out, you can take a picture of the QR code. And what this will allow you to do is we're going to have some polling questions as we go through the slides tonight, and we want public participation. We want you to provide your thoughts to us. This will give you an opportunity to do so with anonymity, but also we can have immediate results from these polls as we're going through this process. So again, if you scan the QR code and then you type in the code here behind me, and I apologize, I'm going to have to adjust my Vanna White, 91239233, and we can see you all joining us, so thank you so much for doing that. And we'll have that information will stay on the screen as we go through the presentation, so if you forget or you get disconnected or something happens, don't worry. You can also raise your hand and we'll do our best to get you pointed back to the right direction before we move to our polling questions. All right, so with that said, let me, okay. Ooh. I got bonus. There we go. All right, so y'all are probably pretty familiar with West State Street, and I apologize, I am Ann Wallace of the Ann Wallace and Mary Connolly WSP staff here tonight. Great to be with you all. I am from our Knoxville office. Mary comes to us from the Nashville office, so we were excited to get to meet here sort of in the middle, in the northern part of the state. And so we're looking forward to going over the recommendations with you all. And with that said, let's just make sure. Oh,
yeah, I think you're going to get it now. Yep.
Okay. All right, so we have our first polling question. We would love to hear from you all. What is one word that you would use to describe West State Street as it stands today? And you can choose whatever word that you would like to. I would recommend keeping it PG since we're in public, but no, it's a great street, so we'd love for you to share your thoughts. And those will start polling in as...
Oh, these are okay.
And I'll let you know a little secret. This laptop is not running the show, so I'm going to have to do a little back and forth. So I apologize for moving on you. But yeah, so we're seeing things like opportunity, promise, dumpy, trashy, congested, confused, empty, neglected, ugly, hodgepodge, mundane, unparkable, that's a unique one, congested, artery, all right, tired. So we'll give it just a few more moments as you all finish typing in. But you can see that there's a lot of diverse opinions, and I think what we can conclude from the words that we're seeing is that there is an opportunity for improvement. And that's certainly what we heard from folks when we were here almost a year ago to the day. It was actually November 17th that we came for our public meeting last year. So we're excited to kind of come full circle almost a year later and bring this plan back to you. But now that we've gotten our first poll done, we're going to go ahead and move to the overview of what we'd like to talk about tonight. We want to remind everybody the purpose and goals that Bristol, Tennessee came to us with. And first and foremost, we also want to just say thank you to TDOT. They actually were the sponsors for the planning process. And I believe there was an 80-20 split or a 90-10 split in terms of cost. So TDOT carried the majority of cost for this study, and we appreciate their work to help communities plan for a brighter tomorrow. So we're going to talk about the purpose and goals that the City of Bristol made their application to TDOT for and how that's translated into this planning process. We'll also look at the analysis and existing conditions of State Street, and then what we heard from the public engagement process about a year ago tomorrow, as well as a public survey that we conducted. And then we're going to look at some improvement strategies and recommendations, and those are actually going to be broken down into some immediate projects, some interim steps, and then a long-term vision, because we recognize that change doesn't happen, especially on a corridor this important, overnight. And then we'll talk about some next steps. All right, so next up, I apologize. What type of organization do you represent? And there are some options here at the bottom of the screen. It may be that you're a business owner, that you're a resident. We'd love for you all to share just who's in the room with us tonight, and so that we can kind of understand who we're talking to. We know we have some decision makers, we've got some staff, but we also anticipate we probably have some business owners and some residents, so.
A lot of residents.
Wonderful.
Any others want to speak? Where the others come from?
Let's see here. And I apologize, I'm having trouble reading.
Oh, no. We got property owners, employer, or employer, and other.
Okay, yes, so residents, property owners, employer, and other. And I apologize, the screen, the closer you get to it, the more pixelated it is. So y'all in the back may have made a good choice. All right, good deal. So next up, we're going to talk about the purpose and goals. So Bristol, when they were putting together the request for this funding, really looked at what they wanted to try and accomplish, and that included maximizing the existing infrastructure, really looking at defining levels of access and mobility, especially for alternative modes of transportation, improving safety for all users of this corridor, whether you be a pedestrian, a cyclist, or a motorist, looking at ways to increase and promote efficiency, and identifying deficiency within the operations of the corridor. And that usually deals with things like traffic signals and turn movements, looking at the opportunity to encourage redevelopment and revitalization of West State Street, especially sort of as you move outside of downtown and sort of the in-between land between Interstate I-81 and the sort of downtown core. And then also wanting to promote placemaking with best practices within the streetscape. What are the things that we're seeing in other communities that really work well to make streets functional and safe and also interesting for people? Here's our next question, and I promise we will have more space between the next question. But you can see here we are asking you to choose a couple of options of your top 2 goals for West State Street. All right, answers are coming in. I think this is particularly satisfying as someone who works with the public to see that sort of immediate response. I hope you all feel the same way.
Just redevelopment, streetscaping.
Yeah. So redevelopment, streetscaping are the items that are kind of hitting the top of the list in the choice of options there. Looks like we've slowed down, so we'll go ahead and move on. But thank you all for participating. Like I said, we wanted to get a couple of these out early, and then we'll have some later on as we talk about our options. All right. Let's see here. Yes. Fantastic. Okay, so just to remind everybody in the room, we are talking about West State Street from the edge of city limits on the western portion, near the Pinnacle Development and Bristol Regional Medical Center and Interstate 81. And then that corridor that is known as Segment 1 for this study is shown in blue. And then you can see the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino with a blue star to the north of the Segment 1 corridor. And then the lime green or bright chartreuse is going to be Segment 2. And that's going to extend all the way into downtown Bristol. And you can see where Bristol, Virginia and Bristol, Tennessee City Halls are in relation to Segment 2 corridor. And again, we just want to acknowledge, this was a transportation planning grant funded by TDOT. And with that, we wanted to make sure that we were collaborative because Segment 2 is the portion of State Street that is split between the two states and the two cities. And we were honored to work with both Bristol, Tennessee and Bristol, Virginia and TDOT and VDOT. That's a lot of acronyms, but when we refer to the city during this presentation, we are typically going to be referring to the city of Bristol, Tennessee. If we refer to Bristol, Virginia, we will try and make a note of that. And similarly, that is as it is with the draft plan that is put forward, and I believe, Sheriff, that went up online earlier this week. So if you would like some really fun, not bedtime reading, we would encourage you to go and look up the draft report that is available online for comment as well. All right, so just making sure I'm tracking on the right screens here. Give me one moment. All right, so we're going to jump into the analysis and existing conditions that we looked at for the corridor. And we'll show right here, this is the existing population density that was captured in 2021. We started our work on this corridor study in September of 2022. So some numbers were in and some numbers were not yet in terms of some of the analysis that we conducted. But what you can see here is that West State Street has a notably higher population density than Sullivan County. Y'all probably are already familiar with that. You probably experienced that with the traffic that you experienced driving along the roadway. But also you can just see how West State Street sort of stacks up in comparison to Bristol, Tennessee, and then Bristol, Virginia. You'll notice that the population density in Bristol, Virginia is almost double what it is in Bristol, Tennessee, and then almost double what we see in West State Street corridor. But countywide in Sullivan County, you've got about half the percentage of population density. And you can see the concentration there with the darker blue being the more dense population. All right. And then we also wanted to look at employment density because truly where people go to work, where they live, is going to dictate how they use corridors and typically how they move around spaces. And so you can see here that in Segment 1, we have a little less employment density, although there is a concentration around the Pinnacle. You'll see the darker red around downtown Bristol, both sides. And Segment 2 really represents a good portion of employment density. So you can see sort of how that breaks down between the corridor, Bristol, Tennessee, and Bristol, Virginia, and then Sullivan County overall. And what you'll notice is that West State Street has almost the same employment density as Bristol, Virginia. And so that's just important to note. It is a big economic generator for this community. And so it needs to be factored in. And so in doing that, we look at things like the forecasted population and employment. Yes, just wanted to make sure we were tracking in the same space. So you can see here, looking out to a horizon year of 2045, which is not all that far away, about 20 years out. We are anticipating seeing an increase in population, which probably feels very real with the amount of folks that we're seeing move to Tennessee these days, and I assume also Virginia. But also for employment, we are planning to see an increase in employment and kind of going from just under 1 to just over 1 in terms of density. So you can see how that sort of breaks down between existing population and future population. All right. Wonderful. So we also looked at the average annual daily traffic counts for the roadway. And this is a good indicator of how many people are using the road and how congested that road is or can feel. And you can see here we wanted to go ahead and put these two images side by side, because you can see that, you know, Interstate I-81 is dealing with large volumes of traffic, right? Significantly above 25,000 vehicles per day. The orange is 10 to 15,000 vehicles per day. I'm sorry, 15 to 25,000, and then the yellow is 10 to 15. So that gives you a sense that right now, segment 1 is in the yellow category. As we look to horizon year 2045, if there are no changes, we are looking at growth in traffic on segment 1 into the orange range. And you can see that there are spots where it will increase to the red. And some of those are concentrated around the interstate and then also around Gate City Highway. So those are things to keep in mind, especially with regards to how the street functions and just the number of vehicles that are going to be flowing through those streets at that time. We do gather this data from traffic counts that are collected by TDOT, at least, yes, it was TDOT. And so we had 3 traffic count stations in segment 1, 1 in segment 2, and you can see that the 2045 is projecting an increase in all of the traffic counts. All right. So some of the other infrastructure that we wanted to look at and get a better understanding of included the multimodal infrastructure, the bike routes, sidewalks, opportunities to walk and bike as an alternative to driving. And you can see in segment 1 that that area is highlighted in pink and that it is part of the marked bike route. That drops off as you get into segment 2. There are not any designated bike facilities. It's just marked as a bike route. In segment 2, there are more sidewalks, but no bike facilities specifically. One of the other elements that comes into play is the opportunity for transit and being able to use transit as opposed to a personal vehicle. And the Bristol, Tennessee, Virginia area has 6 routes for public transportation. And you can see the route map on the right-hand side of the screen. And 3 of those routes are managed by Virginia and 3 of them are managed by Tennessee. So those are all things that are important to know. And then in addition to the infrastructure specific to West State Street, we also have the Mark Vance Greenway that's just south of West State Street. You can kind of see the line here, and it's near Steel Creek Park. I apologize, that's a little bit of a mouthful. And it is an important resource if folks are interested in kind of coming from a residential area into the downtown area. There is an off-street facility to be able to do that. Okay. We also looked at the 5-year crash data from 2018 through 2022. Oh, thank you. It's the challenge of using 2 different laptops. Y'all keep me honest. All right, so we did look at the 5-year crash data, and what you can see is that there are a number of crashes that occurred in the corridor. They're more concentrated in segment 2 than in segment 1. Segment 1 is approximately 3.6 miles long, and there were roughly 76 crashes per mile over that 5-year period. Segment 2, on the other hand, is approximately 1.3 miles, so almost a third of that other length, and it's had roughly 140 crashes per mile, or almost double. So that's significant when you're thinking about what do you do to try and improve the safety and the functionality of a roadway. What you can see are the different types of crashes in the circle diagrams. And in segment 1, the majority of those were rear-end crashes or angle crashes. Angle crashes are typically involving a turn movement or someone crossing a roadway, and therefore they get hit on the side of the vehicle as opposed to from the front or the rear. You can see in segment 2, the majority of crashes were rear-end crashes, and that was over 52%. Typically that happens with distracted driving or not paying attention to the speed of the vehicle in front of you, and you slam on your brakes and you don't quite stop fast enough. So those are the types of crashes that we saw the majority of. Unfortunately, there was one fatality in segment 2 during the 5-year period that was recorded. And you'll note on these two circle charts that there's other or unknown. Unfortunately, sometimes the way that crashes get classified, they don't clearly fall into a particular type of crash, and so that's where that ambiguity comes from. All right. Okay. We also looked at zoning along the corridor, and you can see that there are a variety of uses surrounding the corridor. We looked at the Tennessee side predominantly, just simply for simplicity's sake, because the majority of segment 1 is all within the Tennessee, Bristol, Tennessee portion of the corridor. You can see the purple is some industrial uses, the pink are general commercial and planned commercial areas. Steel Creek State Park stands out. It's designated as rural mountainous, I believe, in the zoning code. And then there is in the yellow residential uses, and then the Central Business Expansion District in segment 2 corresponds with the downtown area at the east of segment 2, and it proposes a mix of uses to try and extend the downtown feel into segment 2, and that was done several years ago, Sheriff? Yeah. So just trying to encourage redevelopment and creative use of that space between downtown and sort of the more rural character of segment 1. And then you'll also see the flood-prone areas, and that also gives you some indication of the topography in the area. Obviously, one of the things that we're blessed with in this area is significant changes in topography. You can see some of the water with some of the creeks, and also just the fact that Steel Creek Park is pretty steep, and some of that steepness follows segment 1 and can have an impact and limit development potential as you all consider future uses. So those were things that we took into consideration as we looked at analysis and existing conditions. All right, now we're going to turn to our public engagement. We really appreciated both Sheriff and her staff working to bring stakeholders together. We met with them in late October of last year to talk about, what did you all see as opportunities and concerns for the corridor, and we had a great amount of participation from both city staffs, TDOT, VDOT, developers, business owners, Believe in Bristol, Advanced Bristol, so a lot of good participation from a variety of folks. And so they came to the table and said that, what they'd really like to see is some more uniformity and character throughout the length of the corridor, increasing safety for bikes and pedestrians, making sure that folks know where they're supposed to be and how to travel safely, making sure that pavement markings are clear and visible and intuitive, I think, was some of the commentary that we heard. And then there's a lot of aesthetic improvements that could be made, both in the public realm and then also in the private realm with regards to mix of uses. Parking was mentioned as an issue for segment 2, and particularly crashes with parked cars. I think that goes and ties into some of the marking issues with the street. Sometimes people aren't prepared for how lanes shift, and therefore there's some confusion. And then lighting was mentioned several times as a concern, just different levels of lighting throughout the corridor and how that can attribute to or increase or decrease safety. And then also freight vehicle loading and unloading was presented as a concern, and how that impacts the function, especially during segment 2, and different uses during the day. All right. We then had the opportunity to get together with folks here in the community, and we met at the Slater Senior Center. Thank you. Wanted to use the wrong name. And it was a great visit. We had about 50 people show up and spend an evening with us in a public open house format where they were able to come in and ask questions. We had several boards that were available for people to interact with. They could put their sticky notes on them and highlight areas of concern. We also had maps where people could draw and label ideas and things that they feel like should be changed or could be improved. And we also really appreciated good media coverage from the local area. I think a lot of folks heard about this study and were eager to participate, which we'll capture the outcome of that in just a moment. So what we heard from people at the public open house was that in segment 1, people really wanted to see improved green space and landscaping, and that there were maybe already existing opportunities for that with the median along the roadway. They again echoed the need for better street lighting, talked about traffic concerns, and really the need for dedicated bike lanes, not just a marked bike route. And then in segment 2, multimodal improvements for both cyclists and pedestrians were highlighted. Pavement marking concerns, I think you'll hear that again and again. And then intersections and turn movements were somewhat confusing, so if there were ways to bring clarity to that. Again, need for more lighting, and then that development should be an extension of downtown, and you can see the image there in the bottom right? It shows the visioning board with lots of different ideas sort of added to those open-ended statements where people could share their thoughts and ideas about what should happen. So with that, we actually went ahead and did an online survey following the public meeting, and that opened in February of 23, specifically the 13th, right before Valentine's Day, and it was promoted through the open house back in November, and also on the city's social media, and we were thrilled. We had almost 500 participants in that survey, and that's just great public participation, which really indicated to us that people care a lot about West State Street and what it can be and what it should be as a spine in this community. And what you'll see here is that we looked at giving people an opportunity to rank some of these elements that we've talked about: the lighting, the landscaping, the sidewalks, the bike lanes, the intersection improvements, things like that. And so the image on the bottom right at the top is the list of things that people could choose from, and they could choose as up to 6, and then they got to prioritize them and rank them. And so the bar chart highlights all the responses that we received on that question, and you can see we had almost 300 people participate in the selection of what they would like to see and ranking them. So the response rate was the top 5, and in that we had lighting, operational improvements, landscaping, land use and built form, and then sidewalk connections. And the image on the bottom right is one example that we shared of a built form that has sidewalks and some urban style of development. And then the average rank, the number of times that something appeared in the top 3, so the lower the number, the higher the rank. We found operational improvements was the number 1 item that people were really concerned about. The number 2 was land use and built form, and then number 3 was lighting, again sort of echoing the concern about safety for the corridor. All right, let's keep things moving here. Okay, and then you can see we used a couple of different types of tools to get people to provide their responses and to share with us what they thought was important. And we had people provide 813 map markers, so that's dropping pins on different places on the map. And it was either for somewhere where they visited regularly, where they worked, where they lived, or areas where they felt like there should be improvements, or areas where they felt like there were issues. And you can see here the two circle charts are the improvements, and the majority of the improvements that people focused on in their comments were the aesthetic improvements and traffic improvements. And then we also received a lot of comments with regards to issues specific to traffic. So people were sharing their thoughts and ideas with regards to those different elements. And now we didn't specifically break them down into segment 1, segment 2 for submitting comments, but we were able to understand from the comments that we received, some were specific to segment 1, and a portion of those were segment 1 west of I-81, and there were general traffic concerns about backup at the off-ramps, intersection operations at Stephen Trail and Island Roads, and then delays with getting onto West State Street. And then we also heard moving east of that area, east of I-81 to Euclid Avenue, Gate City Highway. There's concern about no turn lane at Schenkel Mill Road. There was comment about speed traps, 45 miles, but wide median, minimal development makes it feel like you can go faster, or should. Their comments, not mine. And then concern about no walking or biking options until Bluntville Highway, and crosswalks desired at Skateway and Carson Lane. And then moving into the intersection of Euclid Avenue and Gate City Highway, we had a lot of comments pertaining to that particular intersection, and you can see it showing up in red on that map. And just a lot of comments about issue with bottleneck, congestion, and design, and the fact that it's unsafe for pedestrians to try and make crossing movements at that location. And then finally, moving into segment 2, we heard from folks that they really wanted to see both wider sidewalks and more bike lanes. Crosswalks were highlighted as a need at Bob Morrison Boulevard and 20th Street. And then there's generally a lack of appeal and pedestrian friendliness that could be improved in the public realm, or the realm of the street. And then a desire for safer turning movements at multiple intersections. And again, lighting needs, comments included feeling unsafe after dark. All right, one more public engagement slide here. We wanted to just kind of figure out how are people using the corridor right now. And you can see that 90% of the traffic along the street is actually people in a personal vehicle, which is not unsurprising in a lot of East Tennessee communities. We do see 4% of people walking the corridor and 3% as bike or cyclist. We also had some folks who participated using bus or transit or carpool or vanpool. And then we also asked folks to share some comments about their requested improvements because we gave a fill-in-the-blank statement similar to that board we talked about with the Post-it notes. We gave folks an opportunity to do that online as well. And so what we heard in terms of the most sort of frequent comment was folks wanted to see more new businesses, streetscaping, crosswalks and sidewalks, and traffic improvements. And some of the comments that were associated with those requests were things like a desire for more mixed use, improved landscaping, bike and pedestrian safety enhancements, better traffic, slower and with street trees. So we felt like we really got a lot of good feedback from the community, and that has influenced our strategies and recommendations. And it's my pleasure to get to turn it over to Mary at this point in time so you guys can hear a different voice.
Thank you.
I am the Mary Conley of WSP, not the Ann Wallace of WSP. So I'm going to walk us through the strategies and recommendations, primarily the recommendations at a project level that we developed as part of the West State Street Corridor Study. as Anne kind of implied with the technical analysis and the engagement work that we did as part of this, there's a lot of competing priorities, right, along this corridor, especially in segment 2, where we have very limited right-of-way, right? So essentially what you'll see here is a suite of recommendations that can be implemented in different time horizons, and ones that the city can take moving forward to help build consensus on what exactly does the vision of West State Street look in the future, especially as we get into segment 2, which is essentially, at least in terms of proximity, an extension of downtown. Let's see, I'll have the same problems. We'll see how I do.
You got it.
All right, cool. So I already said this, right? As we were going through the planning process, we were made aware that there are kind of resurfacing plans, especially along that segment 2 part of the corridor. So we really wanted to give some, essentially lip service and acknowledgement that there will be some resurfacing of that segment in the immediate term, I would say, in 2024. That's kind of what our near-term focus was. I'll also walk us through some kind of intermediate projects that could help to serve some intermediate goals to improve transportation and infrastructure, but that can be implemented within the existing right-of-way along the corridor. We did have a project engineer staffed on this project. This is a planning level study, but we did have a project engineer on the project to make sure to ground truth some of the visions that us as planners often have. And then last but not least, especially in segment 2, there's been a lot of planning legwork, whether it was in your comp plan or other kind of planning level documents that had been done for West State Street in the past. That identified some goals. We also heard some kind of competing needs, issues, goals from the public. But what would it look like to have kind of an unconstrained vision of segment 2 specifically? So as I get into intermediate, you're going to see a couple options for segment 2 that we landed on that hit different goals that Anne spoke about. And then for that long-term vision, it'll be focused primarily on segment, or only on segment 2. And you can kind of think of it as that long-term vision. If you had all the money in the world, everything you wanted, what could that look like? I'll figure it out. Okay, so, okay, we're good. So as I said, the near-term goals, we don't even have a slide for it, right? What we realized is that TDOT and VDOT, or Bristol, Virginia, are currently working on scheduling for a resurfacing plan in segment 2. We made sure to identify that as part of the study. And what that's essentially going to do is improve your ride quality of that segment 2, improve your pavement markings, make sure that striping is appropriate and visible and things like that. But what do our intermediate goals look like? Well, for segment 1, we're working with a pretty significant amount of right-of-way, and we're also working with an area that is largely rural in its current cross-section. And less developed, right? So our intermediate goal for segment 2, which we can also kind of view as a long-term goal, we believe that this can be done within existing right-of-way and provide for safer environment for pedestrians and bicyclists moving forward. Essentially what we include in the plan, and you can look for it online, is to implement a 10-foot multi-use path on that westbound side of West State Street. You can also think of it as the northern part of West State Street, that would be buffered from your existing travel lanes. And then considering existing landscaping opportunities within that median. TDOT has a landscape design guidelines that they've established, and I believe that they've updated recently to provide recommendations as to what sorts of species might be feasible, plausible, most aesthetically palatable, I guess, for the community based on the built form. Things like daylilies, mountain laurels, things like that. It's a different arrow, that's the problem, right? So as you dig through the plan, it's going to get super technical. So in the body of the plan, we provide some illustrative plan sheets and cross sections that were developed in concert with our project engineer. We did not include all of these in the slide deck because you'd have to go through a bunch of plan sheets in the presentation, but everything's available in the appendix. So essentially, what would a 10-foot shared use path look like along segment 2 that would allow not only your segment 1, not only to allow for movement of your pedestrians, but also allow for two-way bicycle movements, right? This is just an illustrative example of what it might look like near Pinnacle Parkway as you're heading eastward towards I-81. I'll just keep doing that. Okay, cool. And then again, what would that look like as you head towards Island Road? I think I'll breeze through these really quickly, but maybe give some love to that section right here. If you guys can read it, I'm not sure if you can see it based on the resolution, but if you still have your Mentimeter up, the slide, it should automatically go to this slide that I'm on right now, and you should be able to zoom in. So you'll see 12-foot travel lanes, right, 2 12-foot travel lanes, a shoulder in the middle, right, or a ditch in the middle, 6-foot shoulders on the side, and then a 10-foot bi-directional shared use path separated from your vehicles that are traveling potentially faster than the speed limit by a buffer. I think I'm good. And then in the project recommendations that we have as part of the study, we knew that the sidewalks begin on segment 1 of West State Street in and around that Toyota car dealership by Blentville Highway right there. We have a recommendation to kind of continue that shared use path through that. There's nothing that would preclude the city from weaving into the existing sidewalk that begins there, which would provide a little additional cost savings. Perfect. I guess I'll stop to see if there are any kind of questions, comments, concerns on how we're thinking about segment 1. I think you saw during the technical analysis, we're not expecting any significant traffic or congestion issues along that segment in the future, but what we did here was a desire to increase multimodal infrastructure along there while also retaining the capacity. So implementation of a multi-use path that would allow not only your kind of spandex riding or spandex wearing bicycle riders, but also your families to get to the Pinnacle safely if they want to go for a bicycle ride. Does that seem intuitive to anybody? Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns on that? Cool. Option. Oh, cool. So this is where it gets really interesting, right? This was a year-long planning process, a little bit longer than that. And we realized, a year ago when we were in that public meeting and we were doing the public surveys, that there's competing needs along segment 2, and there's no doubt about it, right? A bunch of people want, improvements to traffic operations. A bunch of people want improvements to multimodal infrastructure. So we provided 2 potential recommendations for segment 2, and I am on the right slide. That's good. Option A that I'll breeze through right now really focuses on improving walkability, really envisioning that segment 2 from Euclid Gate City to Volunteer as kind of an extension of downtown, kind of in line with that B2E zoning designation with kind of reduced setback requirements and reduced parking requirements, and allowing for an opportunity to improve the aesthetics of the corridor. And then option B really gets at what we heard about optimizing traffic flow, making sure that your vehicles can turn into the businesses that they want to turn into and kind of park right where they're trying to get to. So what you can see on the screen right now, I think there's only going to be 1 for option A and 1 for option B, is what that plan sheet and that typical section would look like. Again, this was a planning level effort, kind of, you can kind of think of it as the beginning of conceptual engineering, thinking about it, telling us whether anything we're saying can never happen, and rooting this in reality, right? So what you see right here is a retaining of the existing sidewalks that are along segment 2, or widening them to 5 feet if they happen to be narrower than 5 feet. Maintaining 2 through travel lanes in each direction that are 11 feet, which is typically feasible for your transit vehicles and your freight vehicles, a little bit of a pinch. 10 is usually the minimum. 11 gives a little bit more love to your delivery vehicles and your transit vehicles. And then the most important thing, or the very different change that you see as part of option A, is the implementation of what we call a 2-way cycle track along segment 2 of the corridor, which could then weave in to the 10-foot shared use path in segment 1 as somebody heads westward. That 8-foot 2-way bike lane can serve bicyclists in both directions and would be buffered by your travel lanes by about 2 feet, so that they can feel a little safer, feel a little less stressed driving on that type of roadway. All right, so what would your option B look like? So option B focuses on optimizing your traffic flow, making sure that your vehicles feel like they can reliably move through segment 2 safely, right? So what you see here, and it might be most pertinent to look at that typical section or cross section as we call it, you see 2 11-foot travel lanes in each direction, similar to what you saw in option A. You also see a 12-foot center turn lane that would allow your vehicles to either make a left turn into their business they're trying to access. It also allows potentially for your trucks to kind of unload from there. You see a retention of those 5-foot sidewalks you already have, the curb and gutter nature that you already have in that more urban section. And I would actually be remiss if I did not mention that both of these options retain on-street parking on at least one side of the roadway. We heard a desire to retain some on-street parking because people like to be able to kind of park right in front of the door of the business that they're trying to go to. So that's what that typical section shows right there. You can see the on-street parking. And then you'll also see some strategic, what we call bulb out locations. They'll be in the gray on that area that you'll see. This is really an opportunity to provide landscaping, streetscaping, beautification improvements. You can provide kind of ornate pedestrian scale lighting here, ground cover, colorful shrubs. You can work with TDOT's landscape design guidelines to kind of tease out what that could look like in the future. Perfect. Okay, so this will be the last Mentimeter poll, but we want to hear from you specifically about what you want to see along segment 2. Are you, yes, absolutely, I want more multimodal features, I want beautification, I'm focused on redevelopment, I'm sick of congestion, I want better traffic flow. What do we see? Seeing mixed-use development quite a bit. Streetscaping quite a bit.
More multimodal.
What's that yellow? Is that multimodal right there?
Dark yellow is multimodal.
Beautiful.
Continuous left turn lane is the light yellow, and
Perfect.
buffer traffic. Is that better traffic flow? Sorry.
Okay, so I think what we're seeing here today is what we've seen throughout the entire planning process, right? Is that there's these competing needs. Segment 2 of West State Street, if I'm remembering off the top of my head correctly, has approximately 48 feet of right-of-way, right? So getting, your travel lanes in there, your turn lanes in there, your bike lanes in there, your sidewalks in there, that all adds up to the width of your roadway, inevitably to more than 48 feet, right? And this reflects what we heard a year ago. It reflects what we heard in the survey. There's a bunch of things that people want, and depending on who you talk to, it changes. But what we felt was really important as part of this, and this is kind of what we're leaving the city with as part of this project, is, hey, these are some kind of implementable, more realistic, cost-feasible options in the immediate term that can be done within right-of-way. But if you could have everything you want, and you had all of the money in the world, what would you want, right? Not really rocket science here, right? Long-term vision provides you guys with an opportunity to envision it as an extension of downtown, but also doesn't necessarily compromise some of that vehicular traffic flow and congestion that was a concern to many people. You're gonna have an urban curb and gutter typical section, just like you already have. Your 11-foot travel lanes, a two-way left turn lane. It's 11 feet this time. I believe in option B it was 12 feet. On-street parking on one side of the roadway. Instead of doing a cycle track, which was 8 feet in option A that would allow for both bicyclists going in both directions, it would be 5-foot bicycle lanes adjacent to your travel lanes, similar to what you see in a lot of conventional bike lanes. And you'd also retain that buffer with your travel lane so your bicyclists can feel a little bit safer. Retain the 5-foot sidewalks that are essentially existent throughout, but also provide 3 foot of buffer where you can have a furnishing area where you can do grass strips or some ground cover or some beautification and streetscaping opportunities. So that's what it would look like here. You can see the typical section. You can see the center turn lane with the 2 travel lanes in each directions, buffers to your bike lane. It might be a little hard to see, but it is in the report online. As well as the sidewalks, which would now have a buffer before the curb and gutter. We're good. And then this is essentially what that would look like as you approach Euclid/Gate City. We do retain some of that on-street parking. This obviously would not preclude the city from maybe saying, hey, we don't want all those parking spots. Maybe we want to have a landscaped bulb out right there. We want a beautification opportunity. We want some pedestrian scale lighting. Let's take out one of those on-street parking facilities and put something there. Street furniture is another option. And then the thing that I think might blow people's minds. So kind of one of the limitations of the study that we conducted is we did not conduct formal traffic analysis or PE, aka preliminary engineering as part of this. But we did work with a project engineer to kind of ground truth some of the ideas that we were thinking about. And we heard some desire for a roundabout at that current kind of offset intersection that separates segment 1 and segment 2. And we thought, our project team and our advisory team, what would it look like to implement a roundabout? There's national research that actually your traffic flow and your reliability of intersections with roundabouts is not necessarily compromised as opposed to a signal. So what you see here is what that roundabout would essentially look like. It's essentially a yield motion in each direction, including having all of those crosswalks as well as median refuge islands given the width of the roadway right there. And this is also a great opportunity to have some sort of kind of gateway feature similar to the sign downtown, whether you want to have some sort of public art feature, another signage feature, just kind of a more naturalistic approach where you can use some landscaping, trees, ground cover, things like that. And before I get to next steps, any questions on what we just threw at you in terms of recommendations? And before anybody raises their hand, I want to say, you know, there's not necessarily a preferred alternative coming out of this, right? What's coming out of this is option A, option B, Cadillac version, right? How can we start fostering consensus in the community, right? And we can use this as leverage and a starting point for that conversation. So yeah, with that, I'll take any questions on the recommendations before we go on next steps. Hey.
If nobody else is going to say anything.
Go for it.
I like the creative thinking about the the Gate City Highway intersection, whether or not anything happens with it. I like creative thinking. I am wondering about any recommendations about how to go about achieving a 75-foot right-of-way in an area that's currently more 45.
Repeat it, you said? Yeah. So the question was essentially, how do we get to acquiring more right-of-way than we currently have? I think that's a long and tedious process, right? Some of the long-term opportunities that we have that we showed here today would have impacts to existing properties. Those conversations would need to happen, and that would be kind of a long-term discussion once looking at deed records and things like that.
I'm not sure a lot of those areas have 75-foot structure to structure.
You're correct. You are correct. You're correct, yes. And you'll notice that in the plan as well, you know, whether you're having a parking lot impacted or a building impacted. We also included the parcel line so you could see where that would happen. Yeah. All right, seeing no other questions. Ah, yes, hi, sir, in the back.
Yes, I have two questions for you.
Yeah, go for it.
On the first part, when you was talking on segment 1, how are you proposing to get the bike lane across the interstate?
Yeah. You teased it. I'm so glad you teased it. Yes. Yeah. So we actually had a conversation about what the impacts to that bridge would look like. What we included in the plan was what the cost impacts would look like to actually expand that bridge. There would be significant cost impacts to that bridge itself. What we recommended as part of the plan, and again, just a starting point, would be to maintain the multi-use path, the 10-foot for that multi-use or that multimodal feature, as opposed to kind of limiting it back to a 5-foot sidewalk. And we essentially said, hey, this bridge it's structurally deficient, at least by TDOT records right now, but you'd have to touch that bridge.
Okay, the second question involves the proposed roundabout.
Yes.
It doesn't appear that two tractor trailers side by side can make it around that roundabout.
We did have it vetted for the appropriate truck apron. What we did is we used standard drawings from TDOT. So what you see in the plan should be feasible and have the appropriate truck apron so they can kind of get through that.
And then the other question with that is, was any thought given to that roundabout at the times when the interstate is closed and all that traffic is rerouted on West State Street?
We didn't comment on that, no. But that's a good comment to include. Anything else? Cool. Perfect. All right, so next steps. As Ann had mentioned, this whole effort was conducted due to the city's successful grant application with the Tennessee Department of Transportation. One of the stipulations as part of that grant award is that the plan be adopted by the city. That's in the works right now. And then essentially, you know, we talk about this all the time in our work. These plans are becoming increasingly more important as cities, municipalities, states, counties, what have you, pursue not only federal funding opportunities, competitive funding opportunities, but also federal. Through the bipartisan infrastructure law, there's a bunch of federal money available, not only for kind of traffic-specific improvements, but also kind of safe streets for all and multimodal improvements. And what this plan can do is essentially serve as leverage. When you apply for those grants, they ask you, have you thought about the project that you're submitting on ever? And you're able to say, why, yes, we have. We have done this study, it is adopted, and there are huge brownie points associated with that, right? And then secondly, when we get to segment 2, when we still kind of have a little few, conversations to talk about, let's build some consensus on what segment 2 options for both the immediate term and the long term actually look like, right? And this kind of gives you the tool and the toolkit to continue that conversation. Also, develop a ranking list of your priorities. One thing that we didn't talk about here today, but is included in the plan, is not only do we have project level recommendations, but we have some guidance for the community to think about in terms of parking management and transit, how to optimize transit, whether it's branding, real-time information, things like that, and begin to kind of prioritize, hey, what comes first and how do we set the stage? Because, it's incredibly rare that you can just implement all things all at once. These things typically come in phases, so how do you kind of stage that? This plan and this study had a lot of coordination from the Virginia side and stakeholder meetings and things like that, but continued coordination by both cities and both states is critical to developing that consensus. And then, as you work on funding for segment 1 on that shared use path, what are your funding opportunities for segment 2, whether it's through the federal government, FHWA, bipartisan infrastructure law, or whether it's through TDOT or Tennessee ECD, TDAG. They all have opportunities that are competitive in nature that many of these things could be eligible for. And with that, we'll take any other questions that people thought of within the last 5 minutes. Well, thank you guys so much. Yeah, thank you on behalf of me, on behalf of Ann, the city. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, and if you can, please make sure you sign in just so we have a record of your attendance. And this information is online, so please feel free to follow up with Sheriff or send us an email. We'll be around to answer questions as well. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.